clarify, because this is not the end-all be-all reporting of the results. I talked to a few precinct captains, and they all said they're recording their results on paper as well. This only affects what you're saying, Cenk, is the press coverage of this. But I don't want us to get so... I know it's everything, but at the end of the day, if Bernie won Iowa, he won Iowa, and he's going to win New Hampshire. So I want us to be clear-headed here, because there's a backup method for recording this. This was just an expedient way. It's shady as hell, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to get the full results at the end of this. And in an already convoluted process, to put an app on top of this is idiocy, and another way
So who's
that the
going to win?
Democratic
Is
Party
Bernie getting
is
wrecked?
basically funneling money
Is he getting
to these
cheated?
needless consultants, this needless sexy
He's probably getting cheated
app,
out of the win.
all of this stuff. It doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't mean that Bernie's kneecapped by this.
I understand, guys. I understand. And I love all the perspectives that everyone is giving. And Emma's right, and I don't want you guys to panic. There is, and we reported this earlier in the night, there are paper recordings of the vote. So hopefully they will get those, and they will have I say hopefully, a very accurate count, but these are the same buffoons running this campaign in this epic debacle. So I can't say with great certainty that you'll have great certainty in the results. So I don't have certainty, but yes, overall, I'm not nearly as worried about
I don't
what is the
mind
actual
screwing
result.
a communist.
I'm not, and I've said this now multiple times,
I don't
overly
support
worried about it
communism.
being rigged or anyone cheating or Buttigieg saying, oh, okay, make sure you twist the app so that it's in my favor. I'd still be, maybe I'm naive, but I'd still be shocked by that. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying you don't get it. The whole point of Iowa is, ta-da, this person won.
I'm just saying.
They said that last time. The Young Turks said the same thing.
No, of course not. But you've taken away a huge part of why it's important to win Iowa. And so this is the 100th time in a row that a progressive candidate has gotten screwed.
Am I playing mid or am I playing carry?
Total fluke. And in fact, I think it's likely a fluke. But it's
Well, am I transitioning full time to mid?
Frustrating that all of these go against us. And then when you find out on top that the app was designed or created by potentially Democratic super PACs and one of the other candidates in the race, you set up a situation that is a tinderbox. So don't be surprised when it blows. So what you did was you put it in question.
It's going to be a rough road
in people's minds about whether elections are legitimate or not because of the shady, stupid way that you handled this.
Well, I just think you might be right, but this is such a big story now that it could actually create a bigger story to who wins it, especially if they're able to take advantage of it. So just don't be overwhelmed by the failure of expectation. The failure of expectation is it drives everything in how we react to sports. It is, I think, driving the reaction here. As you expected this big speech and this win tonight, you didn't get it. I think something else is likely to happen because this is not a story that's going to go away at midnight tonight. There's going to be a gigantic story. And maybe the story will be totally about the peculiarities of it and not about the winner. That's possible, and it'll hurt, but it'll hurt the winning campaign. But as John said, there was more than one campaign that's going to be pleased with the results tonight, right? Real quick, the thing that'll continue to make you angry. The lack of results in the Iowa caucus so far has led to a confusion online and on television networks, sorry to hear that, which are used to having some reported results by this point in the night from the New York.
Okay. Yes. Devo.
Choose wisely.
Can you guys pick your champions? I think Mr. Pickles is really bad, if I recall.
Parasite. Bushwhack. Choose wisely. Devourer. Andromeda.
Ooh.
Dude, why the fuck would you go Devo and Oogie after they call short farm and mid
Deadwood.
with no range?
Vindicator. Witch Slayer. Empath.
They're gonna remake. Can I report him already?
Behemoth.
They like Yellow said they'll remake when he DCs.
Let's get it on.
Well, neither do I, but well, he might already like have joined a new game, so I'll just ask politely.
Is he the one bitching with the Devo thing and then left?
Floating along. Singing my song. Give me some space.
What's the point of that word, Chris?
I wonder.
Duh. Like for gangs?
Floating along. Sure thing. Some direction. Warp speed. Singing my
Je l'avais calé en plus that guy was a douche.
Give me some space. Floating along. I will crush them. Where should I go?
Why would they wait 200 seconds for that shit?
He loses MMR, I think, and gets a lever.
Nice.
It's Mr. Pickles ammo. Just wasting our time.
Blind ban.
Oh, it's the same team.
Ban a hero. Choose wisely. Andromeda. The Dark Lady. Arachna. Prisoner.
Well, ever seen a Puppet Master game? It's this one.
Puppet Master. Oh.
Hopefully one of these idiots picks like a support.
Jester. Scout.
Like position 3 or 4. Hammer. And we have 1400s. Why are there 1400s calling carry? Okay, good.
Priest.
That's actually not bad.
Hammer Storm.
Got a... Well, okay, sure. They have a super greedy lineup.
Tempest.
Very, very greedy. So I'm assuming the offlane scout.
Let's get it on.
Yes. Although, just assume that Andre 884 is going to be tilted no matter what.
I wonder. North is interesting. Sure.
What's up? Yeah, sure.
Some direction.
Who, me? Wait, what? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Alright. My bad. Change it. Thanks for letting me know in game 27.
Singing my song. I wonder. Off I go. I feel no pain. Warp speed.
I can.
So where should
I level 3. My bad. Yeah.
floating alone, I will crush them. Give me some space. Finally. I will crush them. Singing my song. Off I go.
Haste.
Yeah. Going. Sun. No.
Off I go. So where should I go? Sure thing. New Earth is interesting. I feel no pain. Some direction. Off I go.
You will not escape this time!
Oh, what the fuck?
Singing my song. Sure thing. I wonder.
Ragnar going for top room.
New Earth is interesting. Give me some space. Floating alone. Off I go. Does it hurt? Give me some space. Singing my song.
Ollie, can you come help me mid?
Interesting. I feel no pain. Some direction. Give me some space.
Arachna going for top room.
Crush them. Sing my soul. New Earth is interesting.
Enemy hero missing from bottom.
Invisibility.
Floating hollow.
Arachna missing. Arachna missing. Care.
Where should I go? Blasting.
Enemy hero missing from middle. Enemy hero missing from middle.
New Earth is interesting. Off I go.
He's trying to sneak up on me.
Floating hollow. Finally. Give me some space.
Arachna going top for room. She's got haste. Care top.
Warp speed. Singing my song.
Are you sure? I don't think we can. Oh. Yeah, yeah.
Floating hollow. Warp speed. Off I go. Some direction. Warp speed.
Arachna missing.
I will crush them.
You will not escape this time.
Enemy hero missing.
At last!
Double tap.
You got baited hard.
Some direction.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
Oh, wow. Dégueulasse.
Serial killer.
If you hook Arachna, she's dead.
Yeah.
I'm not showing. Just stay there, stay there, stay there. Arachna missing. Okay, try and hook.
Yeah, one sec. I don't see her. I think she sees you.
She's over there. Go, go, go. Yes! Good job. That was a game-winning hook, Jerry. As per usual.
Tempest. I don't have ulti. I don't have ulti, dude. Okay, go for it.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
Go.
You will not escape this time. Come back here.
Arachna missing care. She's not mid. Oh, she's mid. She's mid now.
The Legion have destroyed a Hellborn tower.
Regeneration.
Oh shit. Oh, the whole team is here.
Double tap.
Tempest has PK already.
So where should I go?
Defend your buildings, damn it! The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion tower.
New Earth is interesting. Give me some space. Lasting.
Beware.
I'm getting an invis room.
Come back here. You will not escape this time. You can run, but you cannot hide. The Legion have destroyed a Hellborn tower.
Oh, sorry. You can block me?
Double tap.
Oh, shit. Okay. I thought you could block. That's pretty close. Just do right now.
Lol.
Now then.
Oh my god.
Regeneration.
Yeah.
Keep running, Jerry. Keep running. Keep running.
Oh shit, my bad. I don't know why all
Go,
of
go,
them.
go. Matar.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, I can set up with you, Chris.
I mean, last hits, dude.
We should be feeding on Scout and Dark Lady. They're both like super squishy.
I should always do hook or so. I find like the like I just never miss a last hit 3. But I guess
It's about damn time.
yeah, that's what I kind of did. It looked like she was just staying away, so it's like, dude.
Oh, we should punish her. She needs to be punished. Can you stun her? How come? It's on cooldown?
Probably what Chris can do something.
Yeah, just walk up to her and stun.
I mean, she's probably gonna back.
Oh, well, Polly's right beside.
So,
Dude, she just launched an auto attack.
It's about damn
like
time.
2 seconds.
The Legion have destroyed a Hellborn tower.
Should be whacking this frickin'.
The Hellborn have destroyed your buildings, damn it!
You need to be whacking Scout. Oh.
Need bust.
Beware.
Come back here! Defend your buildings, damn it!
Let me take. Oh, I'll take it.
Double damage.
Care, man. Arachna's right behind you guys.
What up?
Jerry doesn't give a fuck.
Oh.
my soul.
Come back here!
Give me some space. Some direction.
Really?
Ultimate Warrior.
I think we should fight this. Let's go.
Tempest is there though. Be careful of Tempest. Back. TDL has her Weaver.
The Legion have destroyed a Hellborn tower!
New Earth is interesting.
God, Lissy, come in.
Come back here! You will not escape this time!
Get Tempest.
Absolutely spiffy.
Defend your buildings, damn it! Defend your buildings, damn it! Yeah.
Singing my soul. So where should I go? Lasting. I wonder. Finally, sure thing. Singing my soul. Warp speed. Sure thing. Some direction.
Defend your buildings, damn it! The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion tower.
Oh, Maron.
Yes.
Singing my soul.
Nice swap. That Tempest ult still got me though. So sick.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I get that.
Double tap! Choo choo, motherfucker!
I guess mid.
Some direction.
Come back here! Defend your buildings, damn it!
Oh.
The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion tower.
Oh. Sick poly. Hey, Quab. Man, Prizzo is sick.
Shit. No. Tried to make it later. Yeah, that sucks.
I mean, we shouldn't have pushed.
No one is going to save you! Defend your buildings, damn it! The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion tower.
Fuck it, I'm buying back.
Oh, we win one more team fight, we could get a Rax.
Where should I go?
Rachna's dead. Okay. That's good. Oh.
Come back here!
Oh. All dead. Shit.
Off I go.
Gotta watch for a Tempest.
I wonder. So where should I go? Sure thing. New weapon into my
Defend your building, damn it!
Oh wow. Our scout is going for a T3. That goes the push. There goes the push.
No choice.
floating along.
Double damage.
Does it hurt?
Oh,
Off
I
I
don't know about that.
yeah. Back.
Ultimate Warrior.
Second, man.
Absolutely spiffy.
Defend your buildings, damn it! The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion
Jerry,
tower.
go try and hook Scout. I don't think you can do much top.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
See, calm man.
The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion tower.
Here.
Okay, let's defend. We can defend. We're 4-4.
Defend your buildings, damn it! A Legion barracks.
Get her.
The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion tower.
newer things interesting. I wonder.
There's an Arachne here. Jerry might need some assistance here.
Serial killer.
Oh my
he's
god,
slower.
so tilted.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
Oh shit.
Scout. Oh my god, what a fucking tryhard. Très fort.
Singing my song.
Oh, can we go on scout? Can we go on?
Some direction.
Defend your buildings, damn it! The Legion barracks has been destroyed.
Ultimate Warrior. Legendary. Double tap.
The game is over.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
That's brutal.
Oh, Shelly. Perfect. Said he's gonna join. That's just the reinforcement we need. Dude, Arachna's super tough mid. Like, I held out super long. I was spamming my spells. I was pulling the creeps towards me. I was harassing her. Flying myself regen and still, like,
I thought I gigged. And then I gagged.
The problem was I wasn't able to get off, like, my spell to keep her in range. Then she ran away.
By the way, Chris, unmute yourself from your stream. Yeah.
Wow. I was tilting the entire time. I guess that was a good thing.
How are the boys? I feel like I'm not gonna be sleeping all night. We casually
Well, no
just
shit.
woke up.
You just woke up.
GG.
There's typical Filipino stuff. Guys, I don't know why I can't go to sleep when it's bedtime.
What are you gonna do, you know? Sometimes it's
Because you guys take naps 3 hours before you're supposed to. Not very wise.
This boy is trying to play the game. Somebody kick this trash.
I think Prisoner's broken.
He's a great hero.
Yeah. Sorry.
Like I said, he fits you more than Devo because you like to be a bit greedier, and Devo isn't that great in that position.
I thought Devo...
Well, greedy as in like you like to farm and stuff.
Oh yeah.
And like Devo doesn't really need too much farm.
Yeah.
You like to be that like tanky and do damage. Plus his spells are easier to land.
Yeah.
So who is tilted and why?
I'm tilted because the other team really did not deserve to win that.
Dude, but our Polly and our Hammer were dead weight too. I was dead weight too, but still, there was 3 dead weights.
3 dead.
Okay, I will just play an overpowered support. And hopefully win the game. How about that?
Sure, amigo. Yeah, I'll play a hard carry. One of my happy plays. Play Sand Wraith.
I can play support.
No, Shelly's gonna support. Jerry, you are the best hooker in the world. You landed some clutch hooks again.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm under the impression if Jay was supporting, that'd be a pretty funny game.
You think so? I think that'd be good.
Mac completely dark. Everyone getting ganked.
Come on.
Jerry, have you ever bought a ward in Heroes of New Earth?
Never. But I used to buy a lot in League of Legends.
You were support in League? I thought you were AD carry.
My main role was AD, and then second best role was support.
Okay.
Jerry, the counter warder, boo.
But Heroes of New Earth, like just tanking is so fun. I don't know why.
It is. I agree. Just soaking up damage and being a dipshit, and then having the whole team.
Yeah, just being in their face all the time.
I agree. That's why I love heroes like Armadon. You're just a scumbag.
Yeah, I kind of want to try the other heroes like Zephyr, Raw.
You do a good job, Jerry. You're always frontlining, tank, soaking up all the damage.
Prisoner makes me a little bit of a carry tank, though. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why I think he's good for you.
I was bigly impressed. Like you did that chain spell or whatever when you hook them and then you do the chain.
Oh yeah.
Just see mon gars.
It's not hard. Just Q and then R.
No, I know, but it's still a sick. It's a sick spell to land in a team fight.
Yeah. Kind of like this hook too, because like I can hook a lot at the same time too.
Yeah.
If I hook
Easier to land too.
And then R, it's just like
it's way easier to land.
Yeah. It's not like the range.
Let's get a nice dose of magnesium in here.
I think I'm gonna study simple GTO all night. Look, else I'm gonna do. Study simple GTO, read a book, hit the gym at 6 in the morning. Sounds like a good idea, right?
Yeah, it does.
And then sleep the whole day.
How often do you use simple GTO?
I'd say at least once a week or once every 2 weeks.
So about DTO, which is basically the same thing, but I don't know how often.
You bought what, sorry?
DTO.
I guess that's like an MTT.
Yeah.
I was thinking of actually buying Insta GTO and plugging all my hands in there. It's not that expensive. I thought it was more expensive, but it's only like about $80 a month.
Blind ban.
Lewis told me to do that.
Yeah.
Ban a hero.
I'm banning Andrew. 100%. We got a junk back. Okay, Jerry, you're suicide apparently.
What's suicide?
Choose wisely, Glacier.
What's suicide?
Like solo hard lane. Means you're probably gonna get wrecked. Okay, well, I asked him not to jungle. He's gonna lane with you.
Oh fuck. Okay, we lost. I forgot to ban Moira.
Okay, Andrew Moira, that's the bans.
Moira is literally the most broken support in the game. If this guy is good. Good luck. Legit, if their pink is good, we are going to suffer.
Andromeda.
Moira.
Literally can gank you at like level 3 from anywhere in the map. have a chain stun, make you have no mana, and it be complete cancer.
5,000 range.
Does our elo even go up when we win game?
Yeah, my elo's been going up.
I feel like I've been just at 1509 all day.
Yeah, because you lose.
Okay, well, Sand Wraith's pretty good here.
Sand Wraith.
Jerry, check our match history list. You'll see that you have a lot more defeats.
How do I check?
Right click, view stats,
Oh,
and then match history.
Match
history. Pyromancer.
Hardy laning this, Flint, Moira, probably Torch for Panda.
Panda mid.
Yeah.
Or off lane. Maybe
Yeah. I'm expecting,
maybe Flint mid.
I'm expecting.
It's possible they do Panda Torture off lane.
Yeah, that's what I'm expecting.
Flint mid.
That's pretty nasty.
Safe lane.
Torture Panda's pretty nasty for me.
Witch
Okay, Witch mid. Alright. How do I want to itemize against Tort Panda? Definitely Iron Shield.
We're 16 wins, 13.
Let's get it on.
We're gonna need a lot of regen, that's for sure.
My daggers fueled by the sun.
Is Panda magic damage or
physical? We are going to need armor. This game, armor is very good.
Yo, is Panda magic damage?
No, physical.
Oh, okay. Am I top?
Yeah.
I'm ready to fulfill my task.
Okay, I'm gonna be expecting you to get ganked a ton by Moira. So good luck.
I hope to be forgiven.
Okay, Tort mid. Alright.
He might just be warding.
So no, he does have ward on. So I
Does
guess
have ward.
it's
Forgive me, master. 1,000 apologies.
okay, so I guess it's Witch Panda off lane.
Yeah, I might feed first blood again, but YOLO. PTSD from the last time. Oh, yeah. There's a Moira.
Yeah, that's why I run there first for my first ward. And you can place the mid ward after.
True.
My daggers fueled by the sun.
Okay, Moira offlane.
The time has come.
Well, more
you could, I guess. You could right click the shit out of him. He has no stat items.
Okay.
He's very greedy.
Okay, Flint Moira.
Flint Moira? What the fuck?
I crisply
Okay, I'm not gonna win that fight.
My daggers fueled by the sun.
Oh, can we sync up? Are we synced up?
We are synced up.
Game ruined.
I'm ready to fulfill my task.
Game is ruined.
Oh, princess of the Lidang Mountains.
Is this a solo Flint?
Oh, Moira's around. Should I stack? Should I pull?
No idea what awaits you. On the orders of His Highness.
Christopher, Greta is my homegirl. Mayor.
Apologies. I crisply will end you. My daggers fueled by the sun.
Oh shit. I didn't get to get the hard camp stack off. This guy's a cocksucker. Oh fuck.
For the Sultan!
Oh my god.
Tort heading bottom.
On the orders of His Highness. Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies. Oh, Princess of the Lidang Mountain.
Oh, next camp.
To be forgiven.
Pull this.
Oh shit, I didn't see.
Come at me if you dare.
I might have been too late.
Okay.
Okay, I got half. Fuck. I'll say. Yeah, can we kill? Oh, actually, I don't have
You have
the.
no idea what awaits you.
Pull again.
My daggers fueled by the sun.
Or rather, yes.
Yeah, I'll pull again.
Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies. Okay.
Perfect.
I hope to be forgiven. Come at me if you dare.
Tort headed top. Care.
Princess of the Lidang Mountain. Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies. You are predictable. My daggers fueled by the sun.
I'm gonna pull again.
I'm ready to fulfill my task.
Oh shit.
It's okay.
I crisply will end you. Sorry. Okay.
I think that was a bad pull, actually.
No, it's fine. Just keep doing it.
Time has come.
We've got a lot of regen.
My daggers fueled by the sun.
I'm gonna have haste. I'm coming top.
Should probably look this guy, right?
I'm coming top. I guess I have war.
I'm ready to fulfill my task.
Fuck, they ran down. It's so annoying.
Tort missing mid. Fuck. Tort missing mid.
Oh, he's spot.
Forgive me, Master.
Care bot.
On the orders of His Highness. I hope to be forgiven. My crisp blade will end you.
Tort headed. Never mind.
Shit.
With haste.
Pull the next camp.
For the creep.
On the orders of His Highness. The time has come.
Oh, he's fat, dude. I don't think we can.
You have no idea what awaits you.
Tort missing.
Fuck.
Tort missing mid.
Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies. My daggers fueled by the sun.
Tort missing.
Oh fuck.
Did you stun him?
I hope to be forgiven.
Shit. Almost had him.
I wonder if they have vision on me. Okay.
Okay.
Think up.
Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies.
Hopefully I make the stack.
Oh, dude.
That's pretty low, by the way.
Which is level 6? Which is level 6?
You wanna go? I don't have a Q, but if he gets close.
Chris, which is level 6?
Okay, they have a word right here, for sure.
Okay.
I'm gonna send a sentry out when I have the gold. I'm gonna pull. Sending a sentry. Like I'm lit on the pull, actually.
Okay, I'm gonna pull this lane. I'm gonna pull this one.
For the Sultan!
That works? Lol.
Apparently it does.
Wow. Esoteric pulls.
Oh, what? No way.
My Chris blade will end you. The time has come.
Tort missing mid.
With haste.
Tort missing mid. Oh, he's back.
Too scared to hit this.
I hope to be forgiven. Oh, Princess of the Lidang Mountain.
It's crazy how much of an experience lead you get, Chris.
Regeneration. On the orders of His Highness. Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies.
I have ulti. If they come, we can probably kill.
For sure. Flint was kind of out of position there. Can we go Flint?
Yes. I'm slow though, but I'm coming. Oh my god, I missed.
Okay, no, don't die.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's such annoying harass, like no skill at all.
Oh, that's a Moira.
Yeah.
So I said she's the most cancer hero.
I might just start jungling.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I've got a jungle.
Enjoy, make sure to stay linked with me, please.
Dude, I literally thought this Andrew was Chris.
Tort heading top care.
I have ulti, by the way, if you need it.
Enemy hero.
Care. Tort missing mid.
If you want to kill, I have ulti.
Oh no, you're just out sync with me.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
The time has come.
Coming bottom, I have haste.
Just get the flint.
Oh, there is a tort.
Shit.
Wow.
That's Moira being cancer.
Nexi, commence.
It really is.
I'm ready to fulfill my task. Sorry. You have no idea what awaits you.
Okay, I actually have boots now. I can do things.
The time has come. You are predictable.
Oh fuck, I'm screwed.
Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies.
Tort missing mid.
Those are my fakes.
Oh my god, she fucking chain stuns me.
I crisply will end you.
Moira's trying to be
Time has
cancer.
come.
Yeah. Dude, how does she get that chain stun off? That's so tilting. Yeah, I'm just gonna avoid that fucking lane.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm ready to fulfill my task. Sorry.
Oh my god. this is such a joke.
Orders of His Highness. A thousand apologies.
Is this kid dead?
Okay.
Of course, Torturer.
He's a cure.
I'm ready to fulfill my task.
Man.
Dude, I thought this Andrew was fucking Chris. Just feeding on me.
Patience.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
I mean, Andrew's really bad.
Be forgiven.
Is that why you thought it was me?
Haste.
No. Oh, I was just wondering because it wasn't pulling or
Buildings, damn it!
Patience.
I'm just gonna make the whole point of my game to help Chris get fat.
My daggers fueled by the sun.
What a cancer lane. Cancer hero.
With haste. Tommy, son.
Horse head at top.
You have no idea what awaits you.
Jerry OI.
Okay.
Well, their mower is disconnected, so maybe we have an out.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
I'm ready to fulfill my task. For the Sultan!
Fake Andrew.
Daggers fueled by the sun.
The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion tower.
Nice. Okay.
I didn't get it off. But
Defend your buildings, damn it!
whatever, the one camp's triple, I
Princess
guess.
of the Lidang Mountain. Time has come, Sari.
Can we just CC?
Can you give me your Blaze Stones?
Hang on, Jerry. I just came online. I've got a PK. I'm gonna feed on a bunch of these kids.
We got 0 and 3, 0, 3, 0, 4.
You have a tough lane. I mean, Witch Panda is gross.
Oh, this wasn't even tough. These guys were so bad. Just Andrew's just.
Well, then how'd you lose?
Andrew's just feeding them. He was like 0, 4 when I was like 0, 0, 0. And then like now Panda just has to like get on me, and then it's like insta death. Can't 2v1. It's too hard. Oh man. This is so frustrating. I wish this guy jungled, honestly.
Well, generally you want to get small items to spam your farming. So like you get the bottle, then you also get a chalice, then you also get a power supply, and then you get your blink.
Okay.
Just so that you can farm a lot faster.
So power supply is a thing.
Power supply and chalice
Yeah,
are
but
both good.
how is power supply useful if I'm not
Helps
in
you survive.
lane?
Helps you survive. And you get to push waves really quickly and everything. Like, don't forget, these small items give you stats, right?
Yeah, I'm
That's the big thing.
I didn't know how to build pyro.
Here for some PSA.
Just put your blights on the ground.
I'm dead.
Try to. Oops. I'm gonna press Q, and I'm gonna steal your creeps, and you're gonna be really mad. Thoughts?
Sure, buddy.
Le pire, c'est qu'il y a rien que tu peux faire. Actually, I'm gonna drop my blights TP bottom, TP top.
If you can TP top, Shelly, then we can maybe kill Panda.
Yeah, I'm gonna try. See how
Can
long
you?
Darius was.
Because I'm gonna TP now if you...
Yeah, well, I'm dropping my Blights and TPing right away.
Dude, Panda went Jade Spire.
It's about damn time.
Okay, I'm TPing. I'm TPing on this kid.
He's too fast.
Oh! What a scum.
Okay.
Defend
Yo, there's a
your
tort.
buildings, damn it.
I hope to be forgiven.
Very tilted.
Oh, princess of the Lidang Mountain.
I'm gonna assume that this is warded. We're gonna counter ward that. No ward there. Somehow. No word there either.
Lol.
On the way.
My daggers fueled by the sun.
Moira's dead.
Oh, can I kill Torchrush?
Defend your buildings, damn it.
Did you press R to kill Witch?
The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion tower.
On the orders of His Highness. Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies. For the Sultan! I hope to be forgiven.
Oh my god, he's got a PK. God, this see Coleman.
Time has come.
See Coleman.
Oh, princess of the Lidang Mountain.
Apparently their Witch Slayer does too.
Serial killer. Come at me if you dare. Sorry.
Was that a mid Witch? Safe lane Witch?
Defend your buildings, damn it.
Red boots.
1,000 apologies.
Okay, we...
Defend your buildings, damn it.
I mean, we're not out of this yet.
Jerry. Well, we're pretty out of it. 17-5.
Hellborn have destroyed a Legion tower.
I mean, Chris is relevant.
Okay, the four of us need to make shit happen. Cause like I can't kill anyone alone.
Defend your buildings, damn it.
None of us can kill anyone.
Yeah, but when we're four, we can do stuff. Panda's chilling here. We could kill him.
I don't think we could.
But he's fucking tanky. Oh, there's a tort here.
By the sun. I'm ready to
defend your buildings, damn it.
That just happened.
That's pretty good.
Oh fuck, Panda's on me. Help.
Can we kill that idiot?
Yeah.
I can stun, I can follow.
Okay.
Big turn.
1,000 apologies.
That just happened.
Okay, not a lie anymore.
Patience.
Stacking.
Oh, princess of the Lidang Mountain.
Go do the farther camps, I guess. Maybe I should have stacked the farther camps.
For the Sultan.
Got it.
The time has come.
Wait for me, wait for me, wait for me.
Sync up with me?
Lol. Yikes, Jerry.
I'm ready to fulfill my task.
For some reason, I feel like there's a lot of people behind that.
I feel that too. Can we do ancients?
I think so.
I need your spells.
Haste.
Yeah. I don't have ulti, but on my Q if ever. Tommy, sorry.
Okay, okay. You have no idea what awaits you. I'm ready to fulfill my task.
I got enough.
Fortress warded this hill right there.
Okay, clearly something middle's warded.
Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies. O Princess of the Lidang Mountain,
I need help counter warding though.
be forgiven. Patience. Patience. Tommy, sorry. Okay, okay. A 1,000 apologies.
This is a very contested area.
My daggers fueled by the sun. I'm ready to fulfill my task. My crisp blade will end you. Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies. Not escape me. On the orders of His
That guy
Highness.
just got old solar.
Can we go here?
My daggers fueled by the sun.
The Legion have destroyed a Hellborn tower.
And then
On the orders of His Highness. Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies.
yeah, they just have all of this warded.
O Princess of the Lidang Mountain.
Snap TP.
Patience.
Second hard cap.
Patience.
Yeah.
The time has come. Patience.
Of course.
Okay, okay.
It's douchebag.
On my way.
Trying to sidestep his stun. Nice.
You have no idea what
Awesome. Nice.
That's good.
Cocksucking motherfucker.
Yeah.
I'm ready to fulfill
Kind of
my
scared
task.
to go in our jungle, but
Our jungle's not that scary. It's our Kong that's very scary.
My daggers fueled by the sun. The time has come. With haste. Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies. Oh, princess of the Lindang Mountain. I'm ready to fulfill my task.
I've got an alt.
Patience.
Get out.
Tabarnak, Coleman.
Oh my god.
1,000 apologies.
How does this?
On the way. On the way.
Just getting started.
Of the Lindang Mountain.
For shit, man.
Double tap.
Fuck, I should have kept farming.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
Why did he just go up the feed?
Piece of cake.
The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion Tower, motherfucker. No one is going to save you.
Well, Jerry,
Defend your buildings, damn it!
you just see what happens when you have a shit support.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably the most miserable way.
As we said, it's not fun to have a shit support.
Is
that real?
On my way, Joe. Yes, it is real. You can tell by the color on it.
on the orders of His Highness. Come at me if you dare. Patience.
Careful, Jerry. No farm agents.
Patience. With haste. Timing, sorry.
Shit.
Time has come. Patience.
Sometimes I mess up my hotkey. Stacking range sheets for mayor.
Yes.
Will be the count.
I hope to be forgiven. Patience.
Well, I'm same level as their panda. It's been
So I
farming
said,
my
this
tail
game's
off.
not over yet. Chris is still in it. You little naysayers have to leave.
Time has come. Timing, sorry. With haste.
Get their flint is might be easier.
Patience. 1,000 apologies.
So many stacks.
Torsion.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
Bunch of people coming in.
Sinking?
Yeah. Unfortunately,
Time has come.
Oh, you already synced up? Or?
you can.
They just counter-worded
Yeah.
here.
Pas grand chose que je peux faire avec ça, mon homme.
Come at me if you dare.
Jerry, can you walk with me?
Be forgiven. Sorry.
These kids. I'm out. Don't die.
Of the Lindang Mountain.
Okay, well, they have range and sported, obviously.
Time has come. With haste. I crisply would end you. Sorry.
Do you want to go on in?
Okay. I'm ready to fulfill my task. My dagger is fueled by the sun. Patience, sorry. be forgiven.
I'm being the greatest sport this game's ever seen.
Yes.
Patience.
Can we Kong?
I think we could.
Okay.
Patience.
I think they're calling me too. Actually.
Kongor has been slain. Patience. I hope to be forgiven.
I'll get this at his own. I thought he was.
Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies.
I unironically think we win this game.
On the orders of His Highness.
Maybe.
Patience.
I need to itemize properly though.
The time has come.
I'm not even sure what to build.
Armor. Or actually, Wingbow again is really good.
Demonic breastplate. I think demonic might be pretty good. Helps everybody on our team.
Wingbow, demonic breastplate, staff.
Can I help her? No, I
My
can't.
dagger is fueled by the sun. For the Sultan.
There's not a lot you can do to help brain damage. It's for life, and very difficult to deal with.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with demonic breastplate to help my team.
Yeah, I think you go Wingbow before it. I think it's a lot better for you.
Nemesis.
Okay, let's move on.
Can't even go here.
Don't look back. The Lidang Mountain. Tommy Sari. I'm ready to fulfill my task.
Defend your buildings, damn it!
Sorry, Andrew, AFK. Okay, it's not.
The Hellborn have destroyed the Legion Tower.
Give up already.
What is Andrew doing? That's fake.
Big hook, Jerry. Big Jerry hook.
The Lidang Mountain.
A Legion barrack has been destroyed.
Gotta wait for that.
Patience.
Holy
Choo-choo, motherfucker.
Alright, we lost.
I'm still up.
Defend your buildings, damn it! A Legion barracks has been destroyed.
My dagger
You
is
reinitiate.
fueled by the sun.
Yep.
That's frustrating.
Patience.
I can ulti in 11 seconds.
With haste.
I'm gonna ulti.
Don't look back. Don't look
More?
back. No idea what we do.
Why am I lagging?
I'm just
Orders
getting
of His
Oh,
Highness.
did everybody freeze there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Patience.
Ah, 60 Combs.
Serial killer. Patience. Sorry. Nemesis. I hope to be forgiven. My dagger is fueled by the sun. Tommy Sari.
Let's get back.
The time has come.
We're all missing.
Get out, Jerry. Get out. Get out.
Waste of time. For the Sultan.
The Legion have destroyed a Hellborn tower.
They put a starter shot.
Defend your buildings, damn it! The Hellborn have destroyed a Legion tower.
This bleed will end you.
Defend your
5
buildings,
seconds.
damn it!
Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies. Patience. Patience. Oh,
The
princess of the Legion
Hellborn have
Mountain.
destroyed a Legion tower.
Get it on, Moira.
The time has come.
Moira's global.
Patience.
Is it? I thought it was 5,000 range.
Practically global, dude.
Patience.
Well, she stopped. So we can fight.
With haste. For the Sultan.
Okay, that's good. Care Panda's about to jump in.
Very nice hook.
I got demonic breastplate. So we can take towers fast. Good job, Jerry. Very nice.
Taking push mid.
Dude, those hooks were actually game winning.
Yeah, it was.
Like we might have won the game here.
Forgive me, Master. 1,000 apologies. Okay.
Unfortunately, we don't have any wards for me to
Maybe we should take their Condor.
Take tracks, take tracks. Tracks.
You are predictable.
The Legion have destroyed a Hellborn tower. A Hellborn barracks has been destroyed.
Patience. Oh, princess of the Legion Mountain.
I don't know if we can take their conqueror.
I'm ready to
Well, not now.
Definitely not anymore.
Patience. My daggers fueled by the sun. Come at me if you dare.
Should I buy back?
No.
Patience. Patience.
They're going to be on something.
Guys, yeah. Care, they're here.
Master, 1,000 apologies.
Alright. I think I have to buy back now. No,
I think I
not.
just threw it.
Fuck.
Did you?
I have ulti.
Oh.
9 seconds, 9 seconds. You go now, go now.
I'm getting ganked. Oh my god! I'm buying back. Don't go, I buy back. Nice. Insane. End game? What?
PK Flint?
They bought back.
My daggers
They did.
fueled by the sun.
Yeah.
Go on that idiot.
Oh my god. Hook!
Big hook, big hook.
Oh, that could have been so good.
I'm ready to fulfill
Let's go bottom.
End the game, no?
I don't think we can end. They're 3 up.
orders of His Highness.
Or
Go
Condor
bottom,
is
go
always
bottom, go
an
bottom.
Patience. Patience. Sorry.
They got it.
I don't have a TT.
For the Sultan.
Snatch Kong?
Well, if they want a base race or something.
Snatch Kong.
Patience.
I'm sending wards out right now. Oh, yo, Panda's right here.
Yeah. Where's that douchebag?
He left, he left.
Finish it.
Finish it.
Condor has been slain. Patience. Patience.
Where are these idiots?
Okay. You have no idea what awaits you. Patience. I'm ready to fulfill my task.
I wonder if I should get BKB.
My daggers.
Staff?
By the
Yeah, Staff's actually pretty good. I want Staff. Kongor?
Oh.
I need Andro though.
Don't do it. They're coming.
Fuck, don't do it. Just gonna farm my Staff.
Patience.
No, don't go there. Don't go there.
My task. Patience. Patience.
Oh, Andrew's
God,
dead.
she's always dead. She's so bad.
Okay, we can defend them.
Yeah, I guess we can take the point.
I have ulti. They don't have Flint. They don't have Flint. We can fight this. Oh my God.
Choo-choo, motherfucker.
Beautiful.
Zerkong.
Go mid or bottom.
Okay.
I think we can probably end mid.
Okay, let's go in mid.
Tommy, sorry. I hope to be forgiven.
I'm running mid.
You are predictable.
Andro, can you come with us, please? I need your auras, Andro.
Maybe we should go bottom. I don't know.
Patience.
I guess end is better.
T4s. Like, we got 30 seconds.
T4s is really good.
Yeah.
For the Sultan.
We're almost there.
Oh.
The Legion have destroyed a Hellborn tower.
Patience.
Oh, okay.
Pilot me if you dare.
Hold on, please hold on. Guys.
God, I'm so weak actually.
Back.
Dude, the switch can own me. It's so annoying. I have buyback. Just never listens. I asked her to come mid. She's still top. Whatever, I got buyback. I really need that staff so I can stop getting owned by Witch. Don't die, I have buyback. Jerry, don't die. Yeah. I have buyback and ulti.
I just really need it. I really needed that gold.
Yeah.
Alright, I'm ready to team fight.
Yeah.
Ready to fucking do
Come
massive.
back. I think we can survive 40 seconds.
Not sure. Pushing 2 lanes. I hope I don't have to buy back, but.
Okay, bye back.
Okay, buy back.
Well, allow me to retort.
A thousand apologies.
Yeah.
Nice. Let's go. Now we can end.
My
We can't end yet. They still have Flint, but we have to get bottom. Push mid, get bottom.
No, just end the game.
I don't think we can.
Flint,
Flint's too strong. We have to kill Flint.
Oh, I'll look him. I'll look him.
Don't worry about it. Their T4 is almost down.
Yeah. T4's almost there. We can do this. And don't TP back. Don't TP back. I know our base is gonna take damage, but don't TP back. Okay, Jay, wait for creeps. Wait for creeps. Don't get picked.
On the orders of His Highness.
Defend your buildings, damn it! The Legion have destroyed a Hellborn tower.
Get the thing. Hit the thing. Just hit the thing. Whew, Maron.
I don't know why Sand Wraith is getting votes.
All good.
That's pathetic.
Oh man,
Jerry
Andrew
was ready to concede.
Dude, Andrew was so heavy. Whew. Nice hooks, Jerry. Very nice hooks. He had some literally game-winning hooks there. You're actually a war picker.
That was the most tilting win I've ever played.
Yeah, that was pretty high pressure.
Jerry, as usual, carrying us with his hooks.
Yep. I think Jerry won the game.
Good fucking game, boys.
You know what? Let's see. Did Jerry win the game? I'll be the judge of that.
You gonna watch it?
I could just tell with...
We had a very game-winning fight at some point.
4-9 and 12, not carrying much with that.
Okay,
Shelly, 4-7-14, that's a carry.
Not sure why I have second in XP per minute and GPM. I don't know. I'm position 5 support.
You guys rewatch the match and see some.
I mean, I saw some really big hooks, Jerry. Like
really big shit.
Yeah, and they threw like what the heck? That panda at the end there.
Oh yeah.
Diving Shelly. What the heck was that?
I mean, like that's the thing. They always think I'm really squishy, but
You
I'm
had Void or
super
something? You had BKB? Wow.
I'm super tanky all the time. Like, and they always try to jump me. They're so brain damaged.
How did Panda not get BKB? How
He's
bad
fucking
can you
bad.
be?
We had
We have
one
like 3
very
tons.
huge. We had one very huge fight that turned the game around.
We
I
had
want to
multiple huge
rewatch that in
fights.
stream.
We had
No,
multiple.
there was one fight that turned the whole game around.
I think that last one turned everything around, but yeah. Oh,
No,
yeah.
It was over before the last fight.
You think?
Yeah.
I need to figure out how to itemize.
Fight.
I think bottle, like a lot. I know a lot of people were going bottle and Sandra. I can see the value now.
Why do you go down?
Why did I go Dawnbringer? Hello? Allô? Allô?